dum-dum, 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 dum-dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered.
Okay, so as you can probably guess, this is an ad made during the height of the Cold War. It was an ad made to show children in grade school what they should do in the event of a nuclear strike against the United States. And if you're someone like me, you probably want to avoid a future where the idea of the nuclear holocaust is a real and present threat. But unfortunately, the odds are not in our favor. There's an old Greek philosopher by the name of Thucydides. He is widely credited as being the father of scientific history, one of the first people to write down events in a calculated chronological order, which he did in his book, History of the Peloponnesian War. And it's in this book we find the concept of the Thucydides Trap, which modern-day historian Graham Allison defines as the severe structural stress caused when a rising power threatens to upend a ruling one. In such conditions, not just extraordinary, unexpected events, but even ordinary flashpoints of foreign affairs can trigger large-scale conflict. In other words, when one superpower threatens to take over another, there's trouble. And we've seen this play out throughout history. Harvard's Kennedy School looked at the 16 times a rising power has threatened a ruling power. And of those 16 cases, 12 resulted in war. That's a 75% chance a power shift will result in conflict. And right now, we are currently in the midst of a power shift. In this case, the incumbent is the United States, having been a dominant world power for a century, and the rising challenger is China. In fact, by some metrics, the United States has already been surpassed by China, especially when it comes to growth. For every 2-year period since 2008, the increment of growth in China's GDP has been larger than the entire economy of India. Even at its lower growth rate in 2015, China's economy created a Greece every 16 weeks and an Israel every 25 weeks. It's only a matter of time before China's GDP surpasses the US. And while it will likely be some time before China can catch up militarily, a booming economy can facilitate just about anything. Today we're already seeing ruptures in the old world dynamic. The Asian Infrastructure Bank, for example, has well surpassed the US-controlled World Bank in terms of financing. Okay, so we've established that when one power threatens to overtake another, bad things happen. And we've also established that China is on pace to overtake the United States. The question is, why does this happen? And more importantly, how can we avoid it? For Thucydides, there are 3 driving factors for conflict. The first is a clash of national interests. We saw this with Japan and the United States. The US imposed sanctions on Japan for various reasons. Japan wanted the sanctions gone. The US ignored them. So Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and brought the US into World War II. The second factor is fear. When an incumbent nation used to being the dominant force starts to feel threatened by a rising power, they tend to get a little nervous. We saw this in the lead up to World War I. King Edward was terrified of the growing German fleet just a few hours from his coast, so he committed Britain to doubling the size of their fleet. The German Kaiser, meanwhile, feared Britain would support Germany's enemies in an effort to keep them down. And next thing you know, an assassination in the Balkans is igniting a world war. The final factor is honor, which is essentially how the nation sees itself. And this might be the biggest driver for conflict between China and the US. The United States has been a dominant power for well over a century now, and no doubt many Americans would like to keep it that way. The idea of American exceptionalism is one readily embraced by millions of people across the country. We're the best. Deal with it. And naturally, many Chinese feel the same way about their own country. Furthermore, Xi Jinping has been systematically encouraging this kind of nationalistic pride. And it's worth noting, China has been around for 5 millennia. Their recent absence from the world stage is more an anomaly than anything. As Napoleon Bonaparte once said, China is a sleeping giant. Let her sleep, for when she wakes, she will shake the world. The Chinese people are eager to return to what they see as their rightful place on top. This conflicting desire to be top dog is exacerbated by the deep cultural differences between China and the United States. Americans are egalitarian. We believe in freedom, democracy, individualism, that every person has a right to pursue their own happiness. Chinese values are almost entirely antithetical to this. They believe in hierarchy and order above all else. Know thy place is an essential Confucian principle. Chinese would prefer a responsive authoritarian regime to the chaos that democracy brings. This is a wide chasm between our ideologies and on par with the cultural differences between the US and the USSR in the First Cold War. Of course, there are also many incentives for these two countries not to become embroiled in conflict. A prolonged, non-nuclear war would set our respective economies back years, if not decades. And of course, both countries want desperately to avoid an all-out nuclear war. The problem, as we saw with the Cuban Missile Crisis, is that the action of one country can force the hand of another, and eventually there comes a point where de-escalation is impossible. That's why both countries must be proactive in preparing for these kinds of flashpoints. So how can we avoid another Cold War? Well, we can learn from Britain to start, who made necessary concessions to the United States during our rise to dominance. The current clashing of interests in the South and East China Seas is bound to create conflict, and it is reasonable to question whether the United States needs to have a presence there at all. Less cooperatively, either nation could secretly work to undermine the legitimacy of the other. This was incredibly effective for the United States in the Cold War, but it would be more difficult in China, where the government seems to have a stronger grasp on things than the Soviets did. Or we could be altogether more friendly and focus on how the two world powers can work together to make the world a better place, such as focusing on the shared threats of global terrorism and climate change. Or we could do the opposite and instead focus intently on domestic issues, leaving the other powers much room to operate as is reasonable. Any combination of these strategies could help diminish the natural tension between two global powers. The bottom line is that peace between the United States and China is possible, but it's not a given either. History shows us that more often than not, this kind of scenario leads to war, and it will take a concerted effort on the part of both countries to avoid Thucydides' trap. China's reemergence on the world stage is going to create a lot of unavoidable tension, but it also creates an opportunity to learn from the mistakes of our past and refuse to repeat them. Ultimately, history is in our hands, and we will soon see if these two countries can rise to the occasion. Hey guys, thank you for watching this video. As always, please let me know what you thought in the comments below, or over on Twitter and Facebook and all of that good stuff. And other than that, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, you should subscribe because I would appreciate it. And because, you know, the videos are free, so why not? But anyway, guys, I really do appreciate you watching this, and I hope you have a great week, and I will see you next Friday.